I want to thank Chairman Markey for convening this hearing and for inviting me to participate. This first hearing of the subcommittee on the United States policy responses towards Burma comes in the light of the recent military coup against a democratically elected government. And I want to recognize our four witnesses who have graciously agreed to join us today. I want to thank each of you for your service, and we look forward to hearing from you. In recent years, the Burmese military conducted a campaign of violence against the Rohingya people, murdering thousands, committing widespread sexual violence, destroying homes. More than 750,000 Rohingya have fled in the last 5 years to live in refugee camps. Some 3,300 were murdered. On February 1st of this year, as you know, Burma's military leaders directed a coup, removed the government that had been democratically elected in November 2020. They have since killed 260 people and detained 2,200 citizens, including some 750 students. In response, the Biden administration has imposed targeted sanctions against Burma's military leaders, including sanctions just announced today, and it has pledged to support Burmese civil society and humanitarian efforts. Of course, the political situation in Burma is reaching a boiling point. People are protesting. The opposition has been silenced. The military junta seems set on escalating the situation further. And of course, there's risk of more murders, more refugees, and even civil conflict. And the risk of all these things grows by the day. The United States stands with the people of Burma in their fight for democracy and freedom, and we condemn the violence against them. But we must also lead an international effort to expand and strengthen the sanctions and the embargoes. And we must call upon China to join this effort or to suffer the public exposure of callous disregard for the plight of humanity. I look forward today to hearing from the witnesses on the current conditions in Burma, including the risks of the conflict's escalation, China's role in this crisis, and what steps the United States can take from this point forward to support the people of Burma. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I turn back to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Kashep, why is it that the military decided to take the country back over to execute this coup? I presume it was for personal wealth. Is that true, or are there other motivations you think that led to the coup?
Senator, it's very hard for me to ascribe motive to the commander-in-chief. There are people who have offered various hypotheses about what may have triggered his decision, whether it was personal ambition or it was preservation of the military's vast and ill-gotten wealth, or if it was a mere power play over the democratic leadership and institutions of Burma, or if it was something else entirely. I'm not sure we will be able to get to a firm answer on that, but what I can tell you is what he decided is absolutely and completely out of step with the aspirations of the Burmese people, and they have let it be known.
Yeah, of course that's true. I guess the assumption is it's money. Money and power often go together, but clearly the reason many people want to have power is so they can get the wealth for themselves and their families and so forth that they aspire to. I would note you correctly are concerned about the humanitarian needs of the people of Burma, but of course money is fungible, and if we're going to put pressure on the financial resources that are going to the Burmese military, their leadership, why that could either be suffered by the people or by the leaders themselves, but that's not going to be our choice. That will be their choice, and we'll have to make a decision as to whether we want to put in place those kinds of painful elements. Have we done anything? I mean, they've been here before. The military has been in charge of this country before. They carried out genocide against the Rohingya before, and so they suffered sanctions before. They clearly expected that would happen again. So what we're doing right now is not something they don't expect. Is there something we could be doing that they really don't expect? That they say, holy cow, didn't see this coming? Or are we basically going by the same playbook and expecting a different result than as a result of doing the same thing we did before.
Senator, thank you for that. You'll forgive me if I want to keep the military guessing by not telegraphing what we might be planning to do. But I will say that I would suggest that what we're doing now is a little different from the past. We really appreciated the intent of the sectoral sanctions like the JADE Act, but what these are doing now is really pinpointing the commander-in-chief, his family, his ruling circle. These are very carefully sort of designed sanctions to put pressure on the commander-in-chief, to put pressure on his children, on his family, to make him realize that he has bitten off more than he can chew, that he is out of step with his own people, and that he needs to start looking for alternatives to the current terrible situation.
Yeah, I presume we've done that before, so he expected it, and I don't imagine we've seen a change in behavior by virtue of what's been done so far. Why is it that the Chinese have not condemned this coup? I mean, are they trying to protect this junta in some way? Do you believe?
Senator, I can't authoritatively ascribe motivation to the Chinese, but I do think that we're motivated by a desire to support the people. I would guess that they are motivated by a desire for stability. They have profound strategic and economic interests in Burma. It's their back door to the Bay of Bengal for their remote interior provinces. I think they care about stability more than anything. And while we've seen some cooperation with them in the UN Security Council, which helped us get through 2 UN Security Council statements on Burma, I think the Chinese are probably deeply anxious to see a return to stability so that they can keep preserving their strategic and economic interests, which, as I said, are compelling for them.
Is there a worst case scenario where, in fact, it is not a stable country, but it devolves into violence of some kind? Is that unlikely, or because clearly, if their interest is stability without regard to the human cost, then if there were a threat of instability, a potential conflict of a military nature amongst the people, a civil unrest leading to conflict, that would be something they'd be concerned about. Is that not a downside, or is the military in sufficient control that would really not be an issue?
I think we look, diplomats are always, to an extent, believers in the Hippocratic Oath. Things can always get worse, and therefore we should always, in our actions, try to ensure that we don't do further harm. There is always the possibility that things could get worse in Burma, that the situation could deteriorate. This is why we're working with friends and partners in the region, primarily in ASEAN, but also with Japan and Korea, with India, and with European partners, Australia and others, and China. And we want to make sure that we can try to avoid any further degradation of the situation in Burma. We don't want to see any more humanitarian suffering than has already taken place. And we want to see how we can get more countries than just the United States to try to get the junta to see that the situation is untenable and that they have to recalculate, and they have to talk to their own people, and they have to talk to the civilian elected leadership of Burma. And this is why I think we're engaged in constant conversations, because we work very hard to ensure that things don't get worse.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I think I've taken my time. I don't see a clock here, and Mr. Chairman, you haven't told me how long we can go here, but I'll yield my time so that other members of our committee get a chance to ask a question. That is, and I'm being perhaps somewhat cynical here, but I think realistic at the same time, which is I can't imagine that the military junta proceeded down this road without having a great deal of confidence that China was not going to stop them. In many respects, I wouldn't be surprised to find that China is encouraging or behind the scenes encouraging what's happened here. Perhaps China expects that the Milestone Dam is going to get reopened and they're going to get the power they would like, or some other deal, and so they're going to pretend like they oppose, but they're not going to do things to really put pressure, because given the extraordinary economic connection between Burma and China, if China were really going to close things down, why, this thing would stop in a big hurry. And I mean, you look at the situation in Venezuela, for instance. We put all this pressure on Maduro. Maduro would not still be there were it not for Cuba and Russia supporting him. And so I do think there's a very real possibility that and probability that China is in some respects, complicit in what we're seeing. And what that suggests to me is that we got to take advantage of communicating to the world that China is sleeping as people are weeping, if you will. China is engaged in a worldwide effort to say that the democracy doesn't work and that the world should adopt autocracy and become autocratic, that that's a better way to go for the people. And they seem to be winning. The last 15 years, autocracies have been gaining, democracies have been declining. And I just think we need a very aggressive world effort, if you will, to let the world know what China's doing and to show what's happening by virtue of them turning a blind eye, at least, to what's happening to their neighbor and their largest, Burma's largest trading partner. And I don't know how we can go about doing that in a more effective way, but we can sell Coca-Cola around the world, right? We can market that extraordinarily for a little bit of caramel water. We can charge people $1 a can. You'd think that kind of marketing know-how would allow us to communicate effectively throughout the world what we're seeing, and perhaps turn enough public heat up on China that they might decide, hey, we better push back on these Burmese military folks. So I turn to the ambassador and Mr. Busby. Any comments in that regard? Are we can we up our PR effort, our communications game throughout the region, and thereby put a lot more pressure on China? Because my guess is there's almost no sanction that we're going to put in place that's going to change the Burmese military from the course they're on. But China has the capacity to do that. Maybe India to a lesser extent, but China certainly does. Any thoughts about that?
Senator, you've raised a profound set of issues. I would say that from my service overseas as an ambassador and in the last 2 years serving in the EAP Bureau as PDAS, it is abundantly clear, and I'm not stating anything you don't know, that the Chinese play a long game. And they play a long game in all of these countries. And they have very clear strategic and economic interests, and they are very pragmatic in how they approach things. We will always stand up for values. We'll always stand up for American values. And I think that these young people in Burma know what those values are. And so I think in a way, the US government is selling our version of Coca-Cola, to make your point. Our values are very strong and very clear. And we see these folks in the streets every day risking their lives to espouse these values. I'm extremely impressed and inspired by them and their devotion to our values. I don't think our Chinese counterparts have that. We also have an unbeatable alliance network and partnerships all around the world. I don't think the Chinese have that. And so we too have to play a long game and have to have faith in our values, faith in our strengths, faith in our friendships and our alliances that we have built up over many decades of careful effort. And I am optimistic. We owe it to the little girl who was shot in her father's arms by security forces in Burma a couple of days ago. We owe it to the young people who were shot, teenagers who were protesting in the streets for their rights. And so we're going to keep we will keep working at it. I think the EAP Bureau has tried very hard working with the broader State Department to shine a light on the challenges that we face all around the world with regard to China's increasing assertiveness, and we'll keep at it, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Busby, any comment?
Yeah, can I just add, as you know, Senator, the Biden administration has made a priority of working in coordination with our partners around the world and pushing back on Chinese influence and pushing back on Chinese abuses. And as you saw on Monday, for the first time, we announced coordinated sanctions on Chinese officials complicit in the abuses in Xinjiang. So there is a very concerted effort to work with our partners in pushing back on Chinese influence and advancing our values.
Thank you. I just note that sanctions is one tool we can use, but publicity throughout the region is another tool we can use to put heat on China and potentially to get them to be dissuaded from their tacit protection of the military junta. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.